Hello and welcome to Indus News Live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. Several Palestinians have been killed as Israel reportedly carried out 150 air raids across the Gaza Strip in its most intense offensive yet. At least 149 Palestinians, including 41 children, have been killed and over 950 wounded in Israeli strikes since Monday. U.S. President Joe Biden has expressed grave concern over recent violence to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Meanwhile, thousands of people have marched in support of Palestinians in major European and U.S. cities. The Afghan military has announced start of offensives in southern Helmand province as a three-day ceasefire with the Taliban ends. It comes a day after the Taliban Defense Ministry accused the Taliban of violating the ceasefire in 10 provinces. Meanwhile, the ISIS has claimed responsibility for the Friday attack on a Kabul mosque, which took 12 lives. The US and Britain have called on Myanmar's military to avoid civilian casualties in northwestern town of Mindut. Both countries' missions in Myanmar voiced concern after the country's shadow government appealed for international help. Meanwhile, fighters of a local militia have pulled back from Mindut after days of assault by combat troops. India has reported more than 4,000 COVID-19 deaths and over 311,000 infections in the past 24 hours. In Pakistan, 76 more people lost their lives to the virus and over 2,300 tested positive overnight. The global number of coronavirus infections has topped 162 million, with more than 3.36 million deaths. Well, those were the headlines. News in detail coming after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, the news in detail. Several Palestinians have been killed as Israel reportedly carried out 150 air raids across the Gaza Strip in its most intense offensive yet. The brutal aggression has martyred 149 Palestinians, including 41 children, while over 950 have been wounded since Monday. Disregarding global calls for de-escalation, Israeli rained down death and destruction on the Gaza Strip, flattening at least 2 residential buildings. Israeli jets also targeted the home of Hamas Gaza chief Yahya al-Sinwar. In a televised address, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged to continue the offensive on Gaza for as long as necessary. Israel's Defense Minister Benny Gantz dismissed the mandate and jurisdiction of the UN, saying no one has the right to question Israel's actions.
No country, institution or international body can question our right to protect our citizens and our sovereignty. I call upon Hamas. Stop terrorizing our people and stop terrorizing yours. It is absurd that we do everything in our power to avoid hitting your civilians while you proudly hide behind them.
U.S. President Joe Biden held separate phone calls with Israeli and Palestinian leaders, expressing concerns over the escalating conflict. He told the Israeli Prime Minister that the safety and security of journalists and independent media is Tel Aviv's paramount responsibility. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres also said he is deeply disturbed by Israel's strike on Gaza media building. This comes after an Israeli airstrike destroyed a building in Gaza that houses several international media outlets and residential apartments. Talking to supporters in Doha, Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh refused to give in and urged the Muslim world to extend whatever help they can.
But today, we are all responsible for Jerusalem. Whoever can help Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa with politics, with media, with social media or with financial support, please do. Whoever can do more than that, then please do.
The United Nations Security Council and Organization of Islamic Cooperation are set to convene meetings on the conflict today. Thousands of pro-Palestine protesters hit the streets in major cities around the world to express solidarity with the Palestinians. The protesters slammed Israel for its brutal aggression and called on the international community to force an immediate halt to Tel Aviv's atrocities. Thousands of people took to the streets of Washington and New York, carrying signs and waving flags in a show of support for Gaza. A huge number of Palestinian supporters also staged protests across Europe, including Germany, Austria, France, and Greece. However, in Berlin, Paris, and Athens, police used tear gas and water cannons to disperse the peaceful protesters. Meanwhile, in West Bank, scuffles erupted between Israeli police and Palestinians, who were staging protests to mark the Nakba Day.
There is another wall where they will draw Palestine's map, and inside of it is Sheikh Jarrah's neighborhood, from where the fire started in all of Palestine. Today, on Nakba's 73rd anniversary, we do not want to say that Nakba is still ongoing, but we want to say today in Nakba's anniversary that it is time for the Nakba to stop after this popular outburst, after this revolution that Palestine is going through from sea to river. We want to say that it is time for the Nakba to stop, and hopefully in Nakba's anniversary next year, all of Palestine will be free.
Meanwhile, pro-Palestine and pro-Israel demonstrators faced off in Toronto. Pakistan says relentless Israeli attacks on the occupied Palestinian territories is a major threat to peace in the Middle East. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi made these remarks in a telephonic conversation with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. Qureshi said the international community needs to take steps to protect civilians from Israeli attacks. He called for a just and lasting solution based on UN Security Council resolutions and the two-nation vision. Speaking on Afghanistan, Qureshi said Pakistan backs an Afghan-led peace process and called for a responsible withdrawal of troops. The foreign minister reiterated that all sides must seize the opportunity to reach a negotiated settlement. He also held a phone call with his Egyptian counterpart and urged the regional powers and global community to de-escalate the tensions. In Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, police have arrested 21 people for holding protests against Israel's military offensive in Gaza. Indian police blamed the Kashmiris for attempting to leverage the situation in Palestine to disturb public peace. They said 20 people were arrested in Srinagar and one from a village in southern Kashmir. Kashmiris have long shown strong solidarity with Palestinians and have often staged anti-Israel protests. Kashmiris view relations between the Indian government and Israel with hostility. The Afghan military has announced the start of offensive in southern Helmand province as a three-day ceasefire with the Taliban ends. Kabul has started sending reinforcements to the northern Kunduz province as well. It comes a day after the Afghan Defense Ministry accused the Taliban of violating the ceasefire in 10 provinces. Meanwhile, ISIS has claimed responsibility for the Friday attack on a Kabul mosque, which took 12 lives. India has reported more than 4,000 COVID-19 deaths and over 311,000 infections in the past 24 hours. The global number of cases has topped 162 million, with more than 3.36 million deaths. Details in the following report. With the troubling variant, drug shortages and disrupted vaccine drives, India continues to struggle with the dire coronavirus crisis. Member of India's upper house, Congress leader Rajiv Sattav has died of COVID-19 complications at the age of 46. Meanwhile, family members of patients staged a protest in Chennai city to obtain remdesivir drug that is used for the treatment of COVID-19. India's government official confirmed that bodies of coronavirus victims were found dumped in rivers. It reflected an alarming practice that officials believed may stem from poverty and fear of the disease in villages.
People are so scared that they're not even coming here to take bath. After reading and watching the news that over 40-50 bodies were found, out of which some were suspected to be coronavirus positive, despite their faith in the Ganges.
In the US, Center of Disease and Prevention Control said schools should continue to use masks and follow social distancing rule for this academic year, as all students will not be fully vaccinated. Down in the south, Argentina has crossed 70,000 deaths in the midst of a second outbreak that is worsened by a slow vaccination process. Medics say in the capital city of Buenos Aires, the mortality rate in intensive care is as high as 67%. Meanwhile, as Brazil registered more than 2,000 deaths and over 67,000 cases in a day, President Jair Bolsonaro yet again said Brazilians do not have to stay at home.
To the health professionals, we regret the deaths from COVID and the other deaths in Brazil, but we must face the problem. It is not by staying under the bed covers and at home that we are going to solve this problem. We have to face COVID-19. Life goes on. We are already talking about the third wave. If the third wave comes, we will also have the fourth, fifth, sixth infinite waves. Of course, we hope against it, but we must face it.
Europe seems to be seeing slightly positive developments. Tourist-filled airports, seaports and highways in Greece as the country officially opened its door to international visitors. Beaches in Italy also appear to be a bit crowded as the new rules come into force, scrapping quarantine requirements for visitors from the EU, the UK, among others. In Pakistan, COVID-19 has claimed 76 more lives over the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the nationwide fatality toll has crossed 19,500. The ministry said nearly 2,400 tested positive for the virus overnight. It said the caseload has exceeded 877,000, while nearly 789,000 patients have recovered. The number of active cases stands at 68,819. The ministry said over 4,300 patients are in critical condition. The US and Britain have called on Myanmar's military to avoid civilian casualties in the northwestern town of Mindut. Both countries' missions in Myanmar issued statements after a shadow national unity government appealed for international help. U.S. Embassy said the military's use of weapons of war against civilians shows the regime's desire to hold on to power. Britain's mission said evidence of atrocities should be sent to UN investigators so perpetrators can be held to account. Meanwhile, fighters of a local militia have pulled back from Mindut after days of assault by combat troops. Protests continue across the country, demanding restoration of democracy and freedom for jailed politicians. At least 790 people have been killed by the security forces in crackdowns on protests against junta rule. North Korea has criticized South Korea's ongoing biannual military training and its recent joint exercise with the U.S. Pyongyang's media warned that Seoul will only stab itself in the eyes by confronting North Korea. It said Seoul's military build-up and drills are strictly based on its plan for a preemptive strike. Pyongyang said the moves further aggravate the already critical tension on the Korean peninsula. Earlier this month, South Korea and the U.S. also held a joint cargo loading and unloading drill at Daegu Air Base. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, 30 people have been sentenced to death after a one-day trial for their role in anti-police violence in Kinshasa. A policeman was killed as rival groups fought over the right to mark the end of Ramadan at a major sports stadium. Kinshasa Police Chief Silvano Kasongo said around 40 people were hurt and 35 had been arrested. Two rival factions have for years disputed the leadership of the Congo's Comico Muslim Federation. Congo has not carried out death penalties since a moratorium was introduced in 2003. Chileans are heading to the polls on the second day of voting to decide who will write the new constitution. Citizens will elect the 155 members of the Constitutional Assembly that will draft a new charter over a year. Elections will also be held for governors, mayors, and city council members. Last year, citizens overwhelmingly decided to scrap the current constitution implemented during the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship. It was a key demand of demonstrators who were protesting since October 2019. Government data shows some 14 million people are eligible to vote in the country. According to Chile's electoral service, more than 3 million people cast their ballot on Saturday. More news stories coming up after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Pakistan's Meteorological Department says Cyclone Tauktae poses no serious threat to the country's coastal areas. Meteorological Department forecasts moderate to heavy rainfalls and gusty winds of 40 to 60 km per hour in the coastal city of Karachi. An official said Pakistan's coastal areas will likely experience the cyclone's minimal peripheral effects. However, the department has advised fishermen to remain in the harbour. Meanwhile, the cyclone is already wreaking havoc in southern western India and has claimed 2 lives. SpaceX has successfully launched a Falcon 9 rocket carrying 52 Starlink microsatellites. The spacecraft is also transporting 2 satellites of other companies. The rocket was launched from the Florida State's Kennedy Space Center. SpaceX says they intend to return it back to Earth once more. The Starlink network seeks to provide internet access through a large number of small satellites with a mass of less than 500 kilograms. The first 60 Starlink satellites were taken into orbit in 2019. Now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.